I think an epidemic, either naturally caused or intentionally caused, is the most likely thing to cause, say, 10 million excess deaths. And that it's pretty surprising how little preparedness there is for it. Now, it's tricky because this is a global problem, so how do countries work together? Which countries should put up what resources? And every aspect of it, the resources to go engage in the affected countries, the allocation decisions. As we've seen various flu scares come along, we haven't had a super good response. Where we always talk about the potential occurrence of a 1917 like Spanish flu problem, and then Ebola, which although it was much smaller, there was some luck involved in that because it wasn't spread through respiratory contact. The reproductive rate was a lot lower, and it was basically people who were sick or dead who were doing most of the transmission. Zika is still recent enough that the understanding of, okay, should we have seen it sooner? Even understanding what the steady state case looks like in terms of immunogenicity, why it showed up in South America and didn't show up in Africa. I think it's too bad in a way that we had to have these epidemics to get us to move, but the timing in terms of the science, the recognition that epidemics don't respect borders, and so whether you're looking at this through a humanitarian lens or a purely domestic lens, these are investments that should be made. I think this is a very positive step. I'm going to talk today about energy and climate. And that might seem a bit surprising because my full-time work at the Foundation is mostly about vaccines and seeds, about the things that we need to invent and deliver to help the poorest 2 billion live better lives. But energy and climate are extremely important to these people. In fact, more important than to anyone else on the planet. The climate getting worse means that many years their crops won't grow. There'll be too much rain, not enough rain. Things will change in ways that their fragile environment simply can't support. And that leads to starvation, it leads to uncertainty, it leads to unrest. So the climate changes will be terrible for them. Also, the price of energy is very important to them. In fact, if you could pick just one thing to lower the price of to reduce poverty, by far you would pick energy. Now, the price of energy has come down over time. Really, advanced civilization is based on advances in energy. The coal revolution fueled the Industrial Revolution, and even in the 1900s, we've seen a very rapid decline in the price of electricity. That's why we have refrigerators, air conditioning. We can make modern materials and do so many things. And so we're in a wonderful situation with electricity in the rich world. But as we make it cheaper, and let's go for making it twice as cheap, we need to meet a new constraint. And that constraint has to do with CO2. CO2 is warming the planet. And the equation on CO2 is actually a very straightforward one. If you sum up the CO2 that gets emitted, that leads to a temperature increase. And that temperature increase leads to some very negative effects. The effects on the weather, perhaps worse, the indirect effects in that the natural ecosystems can't adjust to these rapid changes, and so you get ecosystem collapses. Now, the exact amount of how you map from a certain increase in of CO2 to what temperature will be and where the positive feedbacks are, there's some uncertainty there, but not very much. And there's certainly uncertainty about how bad those effects will be, but they will be extremely bad. I asked the top scientists in this several times, do we really have to get down to near zero? Can't we just, cut it in half or a quarter? And the answer is that until we get near to zero, the temperature will continue to rise. And so that's a big challenge. It's very different than saying, we're a 12-foot high truck trying to get under a 10-foot bridge and we can just sort of squeeze under. this is something that has to get to zero. Now, we put out a lot of carbon dioxide every year, over 26 billion tons. For each American, it's about 20 tons. For people in poor countries, it's less than 1 ton. It's an average about 5 tons for everyone on the planet. And somehow we have to make changes that will bring that down to zero. It's been constantly going up. It's only various economic changes that have even flattened it at all. So we have to go from rapidly rising to falling and falling all the way to zero. This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra, but let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3. The second factor is the services we use. This encompasses everything: the food we eat, clothing, TV.
We see someone like Bill Gates propounding we should extend the shutdown to even longer. He's very involved in various vaccines and other aspects. But of course, Bill Gates' father was one of the leaders of Planned Parenthood in Washington. And what does that relate to? Well, that goes back to Margaret Sanger and the history of what happened with Planned Parenthood, their entire origin, their entire orientation. This is something I have personal experience with because it also is going to relate to sterilizations. It's going to relate to the misuse and abuse of vaccine power. It's going to relate to the history of the FDA interfering with and impairing and at times being corrupted in the process of determining what medicine we're allowed to see, what medicine we're allowed to receive, what medicine we're allowed to choose to give ourselves. It's going to get to the issue of the media attacking currently anybody providing supplements or other things like that to help boost immune systems or help improve people's health and well-being, when in fact large numbers of the media and people within the medical community just over the last several weeks have been promoting the same mechanism of making sure you are as healthy as you can be during this time period, because the risk is not only coronavirus, but the flu and other particular viruses that may be out there. And it's just always sage and wise to be as healthy as you can. So why is the media launching an attack, or groups like Media Matters launching an attack on people simply promoting people's personal health? Why is there this obsession with not only monopolizing the medicine that can be accessible to you, but monopolizing the information you have about that medicine? Well, that goes back to Planned Parenthood. That goes back to an alternative and ulterior agenda about a century ago. I learned about it firsthand when I was a young student, a scholarship student at Yale University. There, I was part of a group that sponsored a dinner and a debate. And so what happened is there would be a discussion and a debate before the dinner, and then everybody would go down and join a dinner that would mix professors and students and speakers and people that were connected to the speaker. One of those people was the daughter of Justice Breyer, who sits on the U.S. Supreme Court. As part of that, we did one presentation that involved a high-ranking official with Planned Parenthood. Now, I didn't know a whole lot about who they were or what they were. I just assumed that their supposed goal was simply to promote the abortion access in various communities across the country. And whatever one thought of abortion, it seemed that they had no other agenda. I learned otherwise that night. I sat down to next to the speaker for the dinner afterwards, and what he told me I have never forgot, even though that was about a quarter century ago. And as he was sitting there, he presumed things about me as a Yale student that also frightened me in what he told me. The way he put it, he said, Bob, have you looked at where the population is expanding? And I realized what he meant. What he meant was that his goal and objective with Planned Parenthood was to control low-income populations, disliked populations, and minority populations in places like Africa and Asia and Latin America, including in the lower-income areas of the United States. Then, of course, that motivated me to dig in a little bit deeper to Planned Parenthood's history, and in the process of doing so, researched a lot of the things Margaret Sanger had been saying in the 1920s in her publications and other aspects. And what it revealed was a history of the intercorporation of eugenics with Planned Parenthood. What a lot of Americans still don't know is that the Nazis attribute American eugenics movement to their own Nazi movement in Germany. In fact, the eugenics movement predated the rise of the Nazis in Germany. Here in the United States, our Supreme Court even greenlit that eugenics movement in one of the most horrendous and infamous decisions in American legal history. And in fact, often our people in nice white lab coats and doctors and medical professionals would go door to door and explain to people they were there to give them a helpful vaccine or something else, and it turned out to be a sterilization, so they could never have children of their own ever again.
The UN and the globalists have been planning to lock us down in the cities, to take away our ability to earn money, to take away our ability to communicate, to take away our ability to travel. And now this is an opportunity for them to put this all in, for your own safety. You have the billionaires who wanted to reduce the world's population. But of course, it's just a little bit of a conspiracy theory, except that they openly talk about it. And if you go back to just this last December 23rd, 2019, Bill Gates and MIT developed a new tattoo ID to check for vaccinations. They said this was a invisible tattoo that would accompany a vaccine. It's a pattern made up of minuscule quantum dots, tiny semiconducting crystals that reflect light. It glows under infrared light. The pattern and the vaccine gets delivered into the skin using high-tech dissolvable microneedles made of a mixture of polymers and sugar. This was developed at MIT, this new ink that is also a vaccine. It was done because Bill Gates wanted it that way. And that way they can see if you've been vaccinated or not. Now, as I pointed out at the top of the program, I had a cybersecurity expert who has given me information in the past that's been reliable. He wants to remain anonymous, but he showed a picture of a wristband, COVID-19. You go to a checkpoint being run by law enforcement officers of the military. You get your nose swabbed. They do a test. If you are negative for COVID-19, you get that little wristband for 1 day. You have to do it again the next day. If you want to travel, if you want to go to work, you want to go to school, you're going to have to get that permission from the government. You get used to that, right? That's what we call habituation. It's what the TSA has done. Remember how the TSA has gradually tightened the noose around our genitals? We were outraged about what they did, and now they have continued to keep that there and to grow that. You get used to going to a checkpoint and having them give you a test and then give you a little wrist strap for it. You would probably welcome the idea that if you go ahead and get the COVID-19, they'll let you out a vaccine that they've got, that they'll let you out of quarantine, let you go to work, let you go to school. That's what this is really about. Yeah, you put this little tattoo vaccine on your skin there, and then it's just the mark from the government, the mark of the beast. And with that mark of the beast, that mark of the government, you'll be allowed to travel, to go to school, and go to work, and so forth. Isn't that convenient?
Human beings are abducting the kids and getting them to the graves to in turn give them to the Alpha Draconans?
That's right. That's part of the deal. They won't come up as long as we feed them down there. You understand? It's about human beings selling themselves out. The echelon attitude here, the needs of the few outweigh the needs of humanity. And sorry, that just isn't right. But it's going to have to be humanity that's going to rise up and take the stand. You're just going to have to turn off your televisions. They're going to have to get in their car. They're going to have to fire everybody in Washington, D.C. that knows and does nothing. And they're going to have to do something. This apathy's got to end. Otherwise, the way we live is going to end. Period. I mean, that's the bottom line. And I'm not coming from a fear space. I'm really quite angry about the apathy and the fact that, when people give lectures and try to tell us, people want to stand up and fight with them. Look at what's happening around us. The indications are everywhere, everywhere. The truth is now an obscure thing. The lie is the norm. There's something wrong here. What's wrong with this picture? Sorry, I'm getting crazy.
No, you're not. You're expressing frustration, I think.